role of mentors in veterans treatment courts. I'm Dan Abreu, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get to opening remarks, I have a short statement to read. Next slide. The views and opinions and content expressed in this presentation and discussion cannot necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. A couple of housekeeping items. On your screen, you'll see where the arrows are pointed. For Q&A, please submit your questions to the presenters in the Q&A pod. You can do that while they're presenting so that you don't forget them. The presenters will address as many questions as time permits at the end of the presentation. Following the opening remarks, there will be two polling questions to answer. When prompted, please respond to the open polls in the polling tab, and results will be shared once the poll closes. You can see the polling questions on the right there. Recording this webinar is being recorded. Slides will be disseminated in the days following the webinar. A certificate of attendance will be available for download at the end of the webinar. This certificate is for personal portfolio use only, and it is not eligible for CEU credits. This is the agenda for today's webinars. Following opening remarks by John Berg and Scott Cherokee, I'll introduce individually the presenters that will be presenting today, and then following the presentations, there will be a question and answer period toward the end of the webinar. At this point, I'd like to turn the webinar over to John Berg, Senior Public Health Advisor for SAMHSA.
Thanks, Dan, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Critical Role of Mentors in Veterans Treatment Courts. We appreciate you taking time today to participate in today's informative webinar. SAMHSA is very pleased today to partner with Justice for Vets to speak about the essential components of a Veterans Treatment Court, or VTC, with particular focus placed on the mentoring component. Justice for Vets is a division of the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, NADCP, a very important SAMHSA partner. Veterans Treatment Courts are an important resource for communities to assist justice-involved veterans and divert them away from incarceration and into treatment. Veterans Treatment Courts connect these men and women to the benefits and treatment they have earned, saving their lives, families, and futures, and saving tax dollars for the American public. This proactive approach is accomplished by effectively targeting and addressing participants' clinical needs, including medical, behavioral health, and trauma, as well as cultural and criminogenic needs. SAMHSA is supportive of Veterans Treatment Courts and provides funding for them through grants and training and technical assistance to the field, through SAMHSA's GAIN Center, through webinars like this and other venues. Our presenters will discuss essential elements that contribute to the ongoing success of the mentoring component and the importance of using best practices in peer mentoring implementation. This webinar will also provide instructions for accessing and implementing vital mentoring resources, including in-person and online training and the new training curriculum for mentor coordinators. We know that the implementation and ongoing management of mentors is critical to the success of VTCs, so we are very pleased to provide today's webinar and hopefully support you in this very rewarding work. We are pleased to have three excellent presenters today with great expertise with VTCs. Major Scott Cherokee, who also was an outstanding project director for a SAMHSA-funded VTC a few years ago, Mark Kammerer, and Tim Wynn. I would also like to thank the GAIN Center and their staff for their work in developing and facilitating today's webinar. At this time, I would like to turn it to Scott Cherokee. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you very much, John. And thank you, Dan. The National Association of Drug Court Professionals and Justice for Vets is very much honored to be invited to participate in this webinar today. SAMHSA's broad-based mission of reducing the impact of substance abuse and mental illness on America's communities is pretty clear and direct. The GAIN Center's extension of SAMHSA's mission by expanding access to these individuals who come in contact with the justice system folds perfectly into Justice for Vets' tailored response to meet the needs of the justice-involved population by diverting this population away from incarceration and into treatment. Before engaging in this webinar, I would be negligent if I did not acknowledge the incredible women and men that continue to serve on the front lines in hospitals, clinics, nursing facilities, and other healthcare settings during this continuing crisis. On behalf of Justice for Vets and the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, we applaud you and thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Just quickly, I wanted to go over the results of the polling, and it looks like the bulk of the attendees here are coming from suburban communities, and the next most frequent category are the urban communities. And then when looking at the area of professions, the judiciary has the largest group, followed by probation and parole, government, and other. So that's an overall view of the makeup of our audience today. And at this point, I'd like to begin by introducing Scott Cherokee. Scott serves as the Division Director of Justice for Vets, a division of NADCP. He served in the U.S. Army Reserves and the Rhode Island Army National Guard for a combined total of 21 years. His occupational specialty was military police officer. He served as commander for training and doctorate component of Training Assistance Group 2 to the Afghan National Army while deployed to Afghanistan in 2003-2004. He's a licensed behavioral health clinician and has an employment background rooted in treatment and criminal justice. He has served as a behavioral health clinician in correctional and hospital settings and in various community behavioral health agencies located in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Mark Kammerer is Project Director for the Veterans Training, Technical Assistance, and Mentor Professional Development Projects of Justice for Vets, a division of NADCP. He was Director of Court Diversion, Cook County, Illinois, in the state's attorney's office from 2000 to 2017. He oversaw more than 30 alternative prosecution sentencing programs that addressed approximately 4,000 cases in any given month. Representing the state attorney at numerous national and international conferences addressing the concept of diversion and future direction of that aspect of the prosecution field. Been a faculty member of the National Drug Court Institute's Veterans Treatment Court Planning Initiative since 2010, as well as providing technical assistance and grant monitoring to Bureau of Justice Assistance grant-funded jurisdiction. Tim Nguyen is a certified forensic peer specialist in the city of Philadelphia. He is coordinator of the Philadelphia Veterans Court Mentor Program, providing peer-to-peer support to veterans involved in the criminal justice system. He is a United States Marine Corps veteran who served from 1999 to 2003. He served in Iraq during the initial invasion in 2003 with the 2nd Military Police Battalion. He is a veteran honorably discharged as a sergeant. He is a certified trauma recovery empowerment facilitator, working with veterans who are incarcerated to help them manage the emotions from trauma they have been exposed to and divert them from returning to prison upon their release. He is a crisis intervention team instructor for the city of Philadelphia and instructs Philadelphia police officers on military culture, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury. So we have an exciting group of people well experienced in this topic to present to you today. So Scott, why don't you lead us off?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate it. Let's get started. Everyone can see the first slide here. I'll move to the second one now. All right. So this is our mission at Justice for Vets. Our mission is quite simple. It's quite clear. We will not rest until a Veterans Treatment Court is within reach of every veteran in need. And what you're looking at here is our challenge coin. For those who serve in the military, the challenge coin is presented to members of a command by the commander. It represents the command's values and is a promise of sorts that we, the command, will be loyal to you, and you, in turn, will be loyal to the command. It is a symbol that represents shared values, standards, expectations, and a unified code of conduct. We are grateful to private benefactors for enabling us to purchase these coins this year and to be able to present them to mentors that we train in person in various jurisdictions throughout the country this year. Although we have not been able to get out there into the field this year to do those trainings, we will eventually. We absolutely will, because this too shall pass. To the individual that receives these challenge coin, we are hoping that our mission becomes their mission, that they will not rest until a Veterans Treatment Court is within reach of every veteran in need. For mentors working in a VTC, this is pretty much a foregone conclusion. Okay, next slide. So how do we get here? Let's talk about a brief history of Veterans Treatment Courts. If you take a look at bullet 1, these are the years that we started seeing a trend develop. America's intervention in Afghanistan began in early October of 2001, and our subsequent intervention into Iraq started in March of 2003. It was pretty soon thereafter that the initial cohorts of service members that began rotating off of deployments and redeploying back home from these theaters of operation, as the military calls them, that we started to see an increased involvement in our criminal justice system. It has been speculated by some that it was not by coincidence that states which had military units with particular skill sets in these theaters were the states that were first to experience this influx. Alaska, New York, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Texas, Oklahoma, and Georgia, among others. Although some jurisdictions in select states developed diversion programs for these justice-involved transitioning service members, it wasn't until 2008 in which a formal, structured court program was created in Buffalo, New York. Many of these prior or current members have been involved in the criminal justice system. Also, if you take a look at that bottom bullet there, also the judicial system was not accustomed to addressing the risks and needs of a particular subculture within the general population. And this is where VTCs, as I'll refer to them, Veterans Treatment Courts, VTCs, really came into focus. Today, April 2020, it is estimated that there are about 425 veterans courts and veterans treatment courts throughout the country. Notice the two terms are used sometimes interchangeably, but oftentimes they are definitely unique from the populations they work with. A vast majority of these courts have received initial training, technical assistance, and supportive training from Justice for Vets. Some have not, and we honestly wish that all of them have received our training. Why? Because our training is based in adult drug court standards, evidence-based structure with a proven track record that works over 30 plus years. So that's why we really are shooting for the majority of new VTCs coming online to receive our training. Okay, next slide. So here's some statistics. Take a look at these numbers. I said 420, this is 407, somewhere around that. Again, when a new VTC comes online, they are not obligated in any manner to report to Justice for Vets that number one, they want to receive training from us, or that they have established themselves. So these are estimates. You see the bottom bullet, which is still sad, it still holds truth today. And this was about just taking a snapshot about a couple of months ago. Close to 182,000 veterans are currently incarcerated. When we talk about the structure of a VTC, we are talking about what does that team look like. And the team looks like it's comprised of a group of individuals from multidisciplines all getting together for a common cause, for a common mission. You'll see there's a program coordinator, there's a prosecutor, there's a defense counsel, there's the judicial officer or judge, a community supervision element. In most VTCs, we see the community supervision element to be probation, but there are also many VTCs that have the supervision element as a pretrial services officer. There is the evaluator and the VJO, which is the liaison. We can talk about this slide in great detail, but unfortunately I do not have the time to do so. But you'll also notice that on this slide is the mentoring component. And the mentoring component is by far a fantastic resource that this particular treatment court has that other treatment courts do not have at this time. When we look at this component, we put it into a triangle, a triad of sorts. We have the legal requirements on the left-hand side, as you can see. We have the treatment component on the right-hand side. But the third essential element to this working so effectively is that mentoring component, which is entirely separate from the actual court structure. Okay. At the base, you'll see social connectedness. Now, in our trainings, we all talk about social contacts and how social contacts are great. Social contacts, an example is, you know, I give you my business card and we agree to maybe have lunch one day, or we talk about maybe a job or something down the line. That's a social contact. And social contacts they might be maybe even a Facebook contact or a LinkedIn contact. But social connectedness, the base of the mentoring component, the base of this triangle, as provided by the mentoring component, really keeps it all together. The legal folks, the judiciary, probation, pretrial treatment, they all have this individual in a small window of time and space, right? The person's engaged in the VTC for maybe 12 to 15 to 18 months. But beyond that, they then move out of the VTC. It's that mentoring component that keeps them connected to the social networks, which are so very, very critical. The mentoring component is not a formal court structure. It is a separate entity. And I want to bring your attention to that bottom bullet, and this is a point we really try to drive home in all of our trainings. It maintains its integrity by ensuring there is never the practice, impression, or perception that it or its individual volunteers have any influence on legal proceedings or outcomes in regard to individual mentees. This is very critical, this point, and we really stress it again in our trainings. We recognize that if we had to sum up what is it that you need to do or should be doing as a mentor, two words or two different phrases I tend to call them. You need to be there to provide moral support, and the other side to that is hope. We want our mentoring component to provide moral support to the mentee and hope. Although I could end that sentence saying that's it, that is it. But that is extremely significant that they provide the moral support and the hope to that mentee, that they will get through this time in their life, that they will move on just like they did when they were in the military, and they'll carry on to that next mission, which is life, beyond the court structure. We want, and these are just key points on this slide that I'll go into a little bit more detail further on. At the end of the day, we want our mentors to be empathetic, non-judgmental, positive, and optimistic. We encourage them to be cheerleading of sort. We want them, if you take a look at the bottom bullet, practice active listening skills. Sometimes in our training, we get really sour faces because one of us is up there on the podium and will say, we want you to shut up, shut up, shut up. And we don't mean to insult anyone by that. Of course we are. No, we don't mean to. But we really want the individuals that are mentors to be active listeners. Okay. And we want them to work in the community to develop those community partnerships. Okay, so this slide is something that we put up in our initial trainings we do for all new VTCs. We put this slide up in our operational tune-ups, which are our enhancement trainings, and we put this up in our boot camp trainings and other mentor professional development trainings that we do. And what we're trying to do with this slide is drive home the message that indeed it does take a village, and indeed it is every component is very critical to the overall recovery of the individual beyond the Veterans Treatment Court program. It's not all-inclusive, this slide, but boy, it pretty much is close to being all-inclusive. There are new developments that are currently occurring in VTCs throughout the country that we're going to update this slide with. But right now, this is a pretty good picture. Two areas I do want to point out right now and how critical they are regarding social connectedness, especially during this time of crisis that we're in, the ancillary services block as well as the community treatment block. Both those areas, that's what we really want to focus on, getting that person connected and remaining connected. And the mentoring component is an informal piece separate from the court that really can make an impact on those two particular blocks. Example, you'll see community treatment with complementary and alternative medicine. That was really, depending upon what community, what jurisdiction you're in the country, it's really driven by the community. In other jurisdictions, it's really driven by the VA. But at the end of the day, we're seeing a lot around complementary and alternative medicine in both the VA and the community setting. I know I digressed a little bit there, but I just wanted to point that out. So if you would check out any of our videos that we have online, as well as the training itself that we do for our mentors, we really, again, hate to say it, but it's true, we really, I know I use this phrase a lot, we're really driving home the message that we want our mentors to practice three particular elements: engage, encourage, and empower. And honestly, during our trainings, we spend a day discussing these over and over again and doing practical examples as to how we engage, encourage, and empower our mentee components. Take a look at that slide for a second to digest it. The bullet I want to point out here is that one on the right-hand side, engage with the court, present with a professional demeanor. Our mentoring component throughout the country, the mentor core, as we call it at Justice for Vets. Professional demeanor is amazing how these individuals will purchase their own attire for the courtroom setting. Oftentimes it's a polo shirt or a dress shirt with a logo on it. A lot of pride going on there, but it also presents with a professional demeanor. And so we want to drive home the message that how that person's being viewed, you know, that individual mentee is looking at their mentor thinking, you know, I need to be where I once was. I need to get back to that. And nothing's better than having that individual mentor sitting in court, addressing the court in a professional manner, wearing appropriate attire. Just a fantastic thing to see that I've seen dozens of times throughout courts throughout the country. When we talk about the next, the encourage blocks, we want, again, take a look at that left-hand side. We want that mentor to really be that cheerleader, to really encourage that individual, especially around pro-social activities. We want that individual mentor to be in the community, to encourage the community to recognize that these individuals that are involved in this court program, they're not from another state, they're not from another country, they're from your community. So we want to encourage that community to become engaged with support. And then we want to encourage the court, which we see a lot of times oftentimes in court settings, how they'll have those brown bag lunches or learning lunch in which the judges will actually get the team together, including the mentoring component, to better understand the military culture. When we talk about empower, it's just that, empowering the mentee, because it's that classic expression where we don't want to fish for someone, we want to teach them to fish, right? So we don't want to enable, we want to empower our mentees. And that's, again, what we talk about a lot during our trainings, empowerment and ways to do that empowerment. Okay, that's what I have right now. Now I'm going to turn it over to our project director, Mark Camera. Mark is a fantastic person that's been working with us, and I'm honored to have him on our staff. Over to you, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Scott. First, I'd like to thank everybody who's out there for expressing your interest in this, what is an incredibly important role that veterans can play in the recovery of their fellow veterans. I am currently the project director for, among other things, the Mentor Professional Development Program, and have been with Justice for Vets since 2010, primarily as a consultant for the first 7 or 8 years as I was employed in my regular full-time job back in Chicago. But what experiences that I had in Justice for Vets were typically in training new jurisdictions that were interested in starting VTCs. And they typically did not involve veteran mentors in those trainings. It involved primarily court-based program personnel. Occasionally, we'd have a mentor come to one of the trainings, and my two takeaways from their involvement were, one, that they were the greatest bunch of men and women I could imagine meeting, who had no motive other than to help out their brother and sister in arms who had made a wrong turn and end up in the criminal justice system. They wanted to do that. Unfortunately, the other impression I got was that they really didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. They weren't sure how to do, what to do, or when to do. And so they would come and sit in on one of our 3 or 4 day trainings and come to me afterwards and say, when do we get ours? When do we get the training that we need to be the best mentors that we can be? So what I did last year, we ended up training. I was struck by one of Scott's slides that said there were over 5,000 mentors in the country. Well, we trained last year well over 20% of those individuals. But as we went through, what I would say to them at the start of each of our boot camps that we did almost 24 last year, that the 2 goals I have for you in meeting with us, one is that you will come away with a sense of learning, that you feel more competent and confident in your interactions with your mentees, and the other being that you understand, that you realize the incredible role that you play in the VTC process. All the things that Scott said before about the role of the mentors are absolutely true, but I would still typically consistently hear from mentors that minimized what their role was. So one of the things that one of our primary goals was to let them know that we approach our work with mentors with the same level of professionalism that we approach our work with the court-based teams. So what makes mentors so special in this process? And there are many, many different things that do, but ultimately what makes them special is the shared experience that they have had with the individuals who are in the VTC. They have a unique relationship with their mentee that cannot be duplicated, can't even be approximated by anybody else, because they have the combination of the role that they're playing and the past experience that they have. They serve a role with their mentee that even a judge or prosecutor or defense attorney or a VJO who is also a veteran cannot serve. The mentor has a unique relationship with the mentee, the participant in the program, that nobody else can fill. And that's something that I will say a few more times, and I hope that you also come away from this presentation understanding just how significant the role of the mentor is. Okay. Then one of the things that I was asked to speak about a little bit was the role of civilians in the VTC process. Given that I am a civilian, have not served in the United States military, believe me, there were times last year when I would be in a room with 50 to 100 people, filled with mentors, with my colleagues, and in this room full of 50 to 100 people, I was the only one in there who had not served in the military. So it was a unique situation for me personally and professionally. It was incredibly rewarding. And the only question that in that my specific role in the training was, could civilians serve as mentors in veterans treatment courts? And I would say consistently, no. That's the policy, that's the stance of Justice for Vets, and it's my personal stance that no, that was not a role that could be filled by non-veterans. And we would have very interesting discussions about it. People would say, what about you? You know a lot about veterans, you know about a lot of veterans issues, you're a therapist, whatever. And I would say, I probably, thanks to the people like Scott and Tim, and people like them that I worked with, I had the pleasure of working with last year and like years before that, and the mentors that were in our trainings, I probably do know more than about 95% of the civilians in the country as far as the role of the supportive roles of the VA and issues related to veteran military service. But no, I would not serve as a mentor. And the only thing, it's not a direct analogy, but the closest analogy I can think of would be if I were at the end of a 30-year episode of alcoholism and 4 months into sobriety, and somebody said to me, you really need to get a sponsor. And in fact, I've got a great guy. He's written several books about recovery. He's a therapist. He's worked with people in recovery. He's a great guy. You'd love him. My first question would be, how many months into recovery is he? And if the answer came back, well, he's not in recovery, he doesn't have a problem with alcohol, my response would be, I need to find somebody else. And that kind of sums up where I see veterans in the mentor role, because it's this shared experience that they have with their mentee. They have gone through things that civilians have not. In talking in my personal life, with my family members who have served and friends who have served, I see their interactions in a different light now than I did before, and I see their interactions being something that I can observe and respect and appreciate, but not one that I would ever understand, nor should I ever understand. So what is it that we end up doing with the training that we provide to mentors? Because they do require very specific training to fill out the questions that were asked of me last year during boot camps. When do we get ours? Mentors require specific training because of their role in terms of communication. Mentors need to communicate in a very different way. Now, in a traditional court, prosecutors and defense attorneys don't talk unless they're working on a plea agreement. The judge doesn't talk to people. But in treatment courts, and including VTCs, these people are talking all the time. But the main focus of communication by mentors has to be between the mentor and their mentee, and between the mentor and their mentor coordinator. There is not to be communication between the mentors and the court-based team. And that slide that Scott showed earlier, and the line that he pointed out, there can't even be an implication, a hint that there's communication, because it'll be perceived as collusion, and the connection that is formed between the mentor and the mentee will be broken. So the communication skills that are required by mentors in their relationship are very, very specific and very much walking a tightrope. So we need to work with them on understanding that. responsibilities they have are very different than anybody else on the court-based team as well. You know, I'll mention in a little bit, and I think Tim will probably talk a little bit about boundaries. The boundaries that exist between mentors and the court have to be very clear in what they can provide, what information they can provide to the court, because confidentiality and trust is at the core of what happens in the relationship between a mentor and a mentee. But also the responsibility that they have towards their mentee needs to be brought out, and the boundaries that have to exist between the two of them as well. Duration, when somebody finishes their VTC, they're always encouraged to come back and visit with people after the fact, but with a mentor and a mentee, it's an individual decision to make. We've known mentors that stay in a relationship with their mentee long after their responsibility connected to the court is over. So all those things are things that need to require training for individuals to have so that they know what they're doing. Going back to what I said earlier, we want our mentors to understand what it is that's expected of them, what's reasonable to expect, and how they can perform those responsibilities successfully. Next, so then where does that leave civilians? As far as I'm concerned, civilians can serve every other function in the court. Some of the best VTC judges I've worked with have not served in the military, prosecutors, defense attorneys, any of those. But it's not dissimilar to somebody working in a mental health court or a drug court who has not had personal experience with going through a mental illness or a substance abuse disorder. You just need training. So civilians need to be trained in these areas that are specific to veterans. And even more so, I would say, because there are certain things even if you haven't had a severe mental illness episode, you might not have suffered from clinical depression, but you know what it's like to be depressed. So it's a matter of extremity and degree. But in the military, if you haven't served, you really don't understand what it's like. So there's very much of a need for civilians to either take courses or somehow to become aware of military culture. There's a very clear culture among individuals who have served. And also to understand the medical and psychological impact of service, because a lot of those are invisible impacts. People have medical concerns way beyond and way more frequently than people who have not served. People who have served have psychological impacts as well, again, that are invisible and in lots of instances are interfered with by the warrior ethos that does not encourage getting help. So one thing that we see frequently is that people have to understand the difference between what somebody can't do versus what they won't do. And it's very easy to interpret somebody in a VTC that as saying that they refuse to do something we're asking them to do, when the reality is they can't, and something that needs treatment and needs to be worked out with them as a result of their military service. The civilian needs to understand the nuances of the VA and the VSOs, what they can do, what they can't do, what the roadblocks are, what the complications are, because the veteran participants really want help in moving forward. They don't want somebody to be in the learning process and be even more frustrated by that. And lastly, there is a camaraderie and a competitiveness within the service branches. And I think that it's important for civilians to realize the difference between the two, and that this is frequently just the way it goes. And to lastly, understand not only the unique nature of the shared past military experience, but that when those experiences get played out between mentors or mentors and mentees and veterans in general in the court, it's not meant to exclude civilians from the process. It's just a way that individuals connect on a level that we as civilians don't really understand, and they're not trying to exclude us, just trying to connect that way that's unique to them. Mentor coordinator has an incredibly important position. We are in the process of the final steps of putting together a series of webinars that will be out in the summer to specifically address the role of mentor coordinators. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. I strongly encourage you to take advantage of that series in the summer, and you'll get, if you're registered for this, I'm sure you'll get notice of when that's coming up. But basically, the mentor coordinator is responsible for setting the tone in the mentor component. This is not something you bring mentors in and then say, here's your mentee, go about your business. You know, the mentor coordinator needs to set the tone, needs to interview people, needs to recruit them, needs to treat it as much like a job as possible, and to provide the training necessary for individuals coming into the mentoring component with what they need to do it effectively. It also needs to model how to interact, to model a level of professionalism and self-care, personal care, that allows the person, the mentor, to go about their work in an effective way. One of the other things that is critical is the mentor coordinator is the conduit between the mentors and the court-based program. The mentors do not go to the court-based personnel to tell what is going on. They go to the mentor coordinator. The mentor coordinator is responsible for understanding what needs to be passed on to the court and what doesn't. And one way that we found that is particularly effective with that process is the development of a relationship between the mentor coordinator and the program coordinator, where the two of them will meet on a regular basis and go over the nature of what's going on between mentor and mentee. And the mentor coordinator has an incredibly important position of knowing what it is that should be passed on to the court and what shouldn't, because ultimately, once the trust between the mentor and the mentee is invalidated, then the rest of it all just falls apart. In terms of what it is that mentors need to know, and again, these are there are 2 slides here, each with 5 areas on it, and each of these 10 areas typically gets 60 to 90 minutes in one of our trainings. So me giving them 30 to 60 seconds does not do them justice in any way, shape, or form. But just so you have an idea of what it is that mentors need to know about in order to be effective in their role as mentors. They need to know what a veterans treatment court is. Why is a veterans court different than a traditional court and different than another type of treatment court? What is it that makes it different? Well, it's the veterans in it, the relationship that the veterans have with each other, the mentors in the program, and the VJO and the VA. The role of the veteran mentor, we've talked about a fair amount already, but the mentors need to know that the significance of it, the importance that they play in the person's recovery and movement through the criminal justice system and hopefully out of it. They need to be informed about trauma. I can't imagine anybody who serves in the military who doesn't have some level of trauma related to that. Some way more than others, but everybody needs to be, the mentors need to understand the role of trauma and the role of treatment in trauma. The mentors need to know that substance abuse is a significant part of their treatment. That could be related, something as complicated as somebody who was injured while on active duty and was treated with pain medications and eventually came home and the VA took them off of the pain medications and they were addicted to them. And what do? They end up becoming addicted to some other illegal substances and brought into the criminal justice system that way. Communication skills are incredibly important. When we first started doing it, I thought, what are we teaching people how to listen for? I mean, how simplistic do we have to be? And inevitably, somebody would come up to us, up to me after a boot camp and say, thank you so much for that stuff about listening. I wish we had more time to practice it, because I always thought listening meant telling people what they should do, to listening to what their problem was and telling them this is the result, this is what you need to be working on. And communication skills are not anything to take lightly. They're not things that come simply to people. And being able to listen to people is incredibly important. Because a lot of times people don't want to have somebody tell them what to do. They just want somebody to listen and help them figure out their own answers. Boundaries and confidentiality. Confidentiality, I've said before, is incredibly important, but boundaries are equally important. The mentor needs to know what the boundaries are between him or her and the court, but also what the boundaries are between him or her and their mentee, because you're walking a fine line again between being a battle buddy who is there to do what they need to do to help a person navigate the system, but not being a close personal friend. You're not their therapist, you're not their doctor, you're not their nurse, you're not their clergy person, you're not their best friend. You are their mentor. And you need to know the difference between the two, and you need to know how to set the limits for what it is that's reasonable for you to be doing with your mentee. Certain things are obvious that's boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Other things are more nuanced. Risk factors for repeated criminal justice involvement might include things like criminal thinking. People need to know what it's like to be in the criminal justice system and how the people are at risk for repeated offending. Empowering wellness and recovery, mentor self-care. You're encouraging wellness among your mentee, but it's also equally important that the mentor understand that this is an extremely stressful situation that they're putting themselves in, and they need to be looking out for their own health, their own wellness, so that they don't put themselves in a situation where they are deteriorating in their mental state because of the stress that they're taking on. And again, that's a role that the mentor coordinator needs to take on, to be observant with their mentors, that things don't get on a downward slide with the mentor, him or herself. And then suicide awareness and prevention is something that we have not focused on sufficiently. We will focus on more adequately in the future, but what is the role of the mentor in identifying when somebody is at risk, when somebody needs to be referred for treatment, when somebody needs to call 911. This is one of the most critical things for mentors, because everybody reads about the god-awful numbers related to suicide among veterans, and mentors really are very, very sensitive to not contributing to that and being fearful that they're going to be saying or doing the wrong thing and result in a horrible outcome. Lastly, in terms of us providing professionalism among the mentors, there are resources out there, and I've got to say, even though I've been connected to Justice for Vets for 10 years now, Justice for Vets is a phenomenal resource. You go onto the website, there are resources like, program resources like manuals, documents, everything you could imagine, and it's all free for you to use. You go on there and look up memorandums of understanding. Anything you want to look up, it's there. Also, what's there is research, because as you go out into the community and try to convince people to understand what is going on, why this is important, you're going to get this is just a get-out-of-jail-free card line, and you need to have the research to back up the fact that this is incredibly important. We have online courses for mentors. We're going to have online courses for mentor coordinators. We have trauma courses. Psych Armor is another incredible resource. Go onto their website. Just kind of wind your way around it just to see what's there. They have lots of practical information, as it says here, about benefits and the VA and whatever. Between those two, there's a tremendous amount of resources. And lastly, I would say I'd like to think that I'm a resource. As the program director for Mentor Professional Development, you've got my contact information. Don't ever hesitate to contact me. I realize that I don't know a third of what needs to be known about mentors and mentoring, but I think one of the things that I have learned over the years is when I don't know something, I acknowledge that I don't know it, and more often than not, I know somebody who does know it, and I will get you connected. Justice for Vets is an incredibly dedicated organization that has as its goal to get information out, from my perspective, get information out to the people that are working in the field, including mentors, to be able to provide as much professionalism and training as possible. Okay, that's it for me. I'm going to turn over now to a colleague, Tim Wynn, and Tim's going to go from his own personal professional experience. Okay, Tim.
All right, thanks, Mark. So I'm here to basically talk a little bit about my own personal story, going from a participant in the Philadelphia Veterans Treatment Court to now being the actual mentor coordinator in that same court that I was once a defendant in. So, let's see here. The young me, pictures of young me. Yeah, I'm having trouble with my computer. I lost my screen here. So anyway, on that first slide, if anybody on the call can move the slide for me because my screen just went out. I had been here before, it says on that first slide. My past, I actually, when I came back from Iraq, I had 7 arrests. I spent a year of my life incarcerated. You know, it was a very hard struggle on myself and my family. Being that I went over to Iraq in 2003, I did not have, you know, I was one of the first to come back, being one of the first to go over there. So I did not have the support system that we have out there today. There were no veterans courts. So eventually in 2014, I was put in a veterans treatment court in Philadelphia. And I remember what it was like the first time walking in there. You know, it was different. I remember sitting in the hallway, and I was actually greeted by the public defender at that time, a woman by the name of Melissa Stango, who worked at the public defender's office. She came walking up to me, and she said, "Hey, Mr. Wynn, how are you doing?" And I remember feeling a relief come over me, and I got the sense that, you know, this wasn't the same old courtroom that I was used to. This wasn't the same situation that I found myself in many times before. So I remember what it was like walking in there for the first time into the Philadelphia Veterans Treatment Court. And, you know, I call it the comfort factor. When I walked in there, there were veterans to my left and to my right that looked just like me. They were dealing with the same issues that I had been dealing with. And it was a comforting experience. It brought me back to sort of that camaraderie that I experienced in the military. You know, and it's very unique. You have a mentor there too from day one. So, you know, you're comforted by this person who sort of has been in the same shoes that you have been in. So the benefits of lived experience, you know, you have these mentors there, and, you know, they've just lived experience. Many of them have lived through certain things such as PTSD, substance abuse, stuff like that. And the benefit of that is they show you that there's hope that you can actually make it through this stuff, get through this program, turn your life around, and get back to the person that you once were. The next point there, the importance of a battle buddy. You know, when you get in there, when you get into that court, you're scared, you're confused. It's almost like, you know, when you were in the military and you had to go to a new unit. You know, you were sort of the new guy on the block, and you really didn't have any friends there. You didn't know what protocol was there. I mean, so it's a very intimidating, you know, part of your life. And you're at your lowest point when you come into the court system. So battle buddy is extremely important, you know, when you first get into court. Next thing is remaining plugged in. Early in recovery, you must stay plugged into the recovery world. That's where a mentor comes into play. With a mentor, you know, this is someone who's going to always be there checking on you. A mentor gets to know you. They get to know everything about you, really. They get to know about your family. They get to know about what it is that you're into, your interest, and there's really no getting away, you know, from a mentor. they're there. They're your battle buddy. They're your friend. And they keep you plugged into the court. They keep you plugged into your recovery. So next slide. If anyone on the call can move to the next slide. I'm still having computer issues. So the next slide, top point, it says no two veterans are the same. Although similar, no two veterans have the same exact story. And I try to tell that to my my mentors all the time, that you never want to use the phrase, hey, I know exactly what you're going through, because you don't. No two stories are the same. We all come from different cultural backgrounds, family dynamics, substance abuse, poverty is another thing that plays a role in the lives of many veterans, especially in the inner city. So there's a lot of different factors. So no two veterans are the same. Next point there is everybody's recovery is different. Some veterans go to 12-step programs, others go to trauma groups. There are new types of things now that are like equine therapy is a big one that we do in our court. Service dogs is another one. But again, everybody's recovery is different. You have to find out what's good for that veteran. And we practice a lot of self-advocacy. We have that veteran stick up for themselves and participate in their recovery. It's very, very important. Next is why my personal story is so important. And I talked about that earlier. It spreads hope. If I share my personal story about being a veteran and actually came through that court, was once a defendant, and now I'm the mentor coordinator, that definitely shines a ray of hope on these veterans who are walking through the door for the first time. And many times what we do, we have a lot of Vietnam veterans who have never gotten any kind of help or support or anything like that through the years. And, they finally get to this court after 50-some years and they get the help. So you can even shed hope on a Vietnam veteran who never really got a welcome home or anything like that in the past. So one of the things that I've also learned is listen more than you speak. Silence is golden when you're interacting with your mentees. Your mentees, a lot of times when it's just you and them in the mentor room or wherever you may be, this is their chance to open up, because they don't get a chance to open up at home. They do not get the chance to open up in different places, and they feel comfortable with their mentor. So that is a huge thing. Silence is definitely golden. Remain non-judgmental and meet them where they are. I think together this comes down to empathy and respect. No matter where they are, be ready to help them. Some veterans come into your veterans treatment court, they're in worse shape than, other veterans. Sometimes you have veterans that come in, never been in trouble with the law. They're a retired police officer. They went out for the night with their wife. They had a glass of wine, and they got a DUI on their way home. So you got to meet every veteran where they're at. You have those type of veterans, and then you have the type of veterans who are, using heroin every single day. So again, meet them where they are, meet their needs, and do everything you can to help that individual. Next slide, please. The role of a mentor coordinator. The importance of a mentor coordinator. Think of yourself sort of as the quarterback, for lack of better terms. You're the person that coordinates everything and gets everything going, on a day-to-day basis. You got to remember, a lot of our mentors are volunteers. They don't do this, for a day job. So as a mentor coordinator, you got to be the person behind the scenes, getting everything together and handing out information, making sure everybody's informed. One of those things that falls under the duties of a mentor coordinator is, recruiting. Recruiting is a very, very tough thing. This is probably the toughest and probably the biggest part of your full-time job, is trying to get people with the availability, especially veterans, to come in and actually help mentor. So again, that is a very, very tough job, recruiting. There's a lot of tricks to that we can talk about maybe later in the Q&A, but recruiting is definitely a tough one. Game planning, you have to hand out every week to your mentors who they have that week, who's struggling, who's going through different things. They need to be well informed, so you have to do things like that. Providing structure is huge. You know, you're the one that's going to give them the resources, your mentors the resources. And, you know, it's a chain of command also, just like we're in the military, which is huge for vets. It's very, very big for vets to have a chain of command. So providing that structure is huge. Training, mental health first aid. If you don't know about this, look into this. This is a free training they provide throughout the country. It's very big. It actually started in Australia. But mental health first aid, and they have a veterans curriculum. You can check into that and get your mentors trained in that. Also, Mark talked about it already, justiceforvets.org, and also check out Psych Armor for different trainings as well. Challenges we face as mentor coordinators. Again, top of the list is recruiting. That's a very tough thing. One of the things that we're noticing too now is that a lot of our mentors are Vietnam veterans, and they're getting to the age now where, you know, they're not as mobile as they used to be. So they're not necessarily able to get out in the community and come down and stick it out every week in our court. So it's a sustainability piece under recruiting is one of those things too. I mean, you got these older Vietnam vets. You gotta be able to see who can handle what. You know, with such a large number of veterans involved in the criminal justice system, you don't want to overwork your mentee or your mentor either. You don't want to have them stressed out. I mean, because secondary trauma is a real thing. Mark talked about it a little bit, but you got to be able to keep enough mentors so they don't have caseload, for a lack of better term, that's overwhelming for them. So. Next one's boundaries. I know Mark talked about this. You know, we never want to give out legal advice, medical advice, money, gifts, anything like that. These are all things that, you know, can ruin relationships with mentors and mentees. So, yeah, boundaries are huge. It can absolutely devastate your program, and you know, it's definitely things that you need to take a look at. So, last thing I want to talk about as far as challenges of the mentor coordinator, the mentor contract, and this was something that was taught to me by Jack O'Connor, who we kind of call the godfather of this mentoring thing. He's one of the guys that started the Veterans Treatment Court in Buffalo, New York. And what he did, he drafted up a contract between not only the mentor and the mentee, but also the mentor and the mentor coordinator. So basically it lays out the rules and regulations and the expectations of either side. And you both read it together, go through it, and sign the copy of the agreement. And why does this work? One of the reasons is if you have a mentor who is breaking the rules, and, you know, you gave them their book, and they know all the rules. They know what to do, what not to do. They've been around a while, and then finally they break the rules. They break one of those boundaries, and you got to have a talk with them as a mentor coordinator. You can pull that contract back out and take a look at it and say, look, this is what we agreed upon. And sometimes it may make it a little easier if you have to let a mentor go. You know, so it's a very important piece, and I think if you don't have that in your court, it's something you definitely want to look into. Next slide, please. Every court is different. Up top it says, improvise, adapt, and overcome. Get creative. Definitely get creative. I know that, you know, I get to travel around and do these trainings, and I find that not every court, you know, in our country has the resources that, let's say, Philadelphia has in a big city. So you have to get creative. You have to think of ways to help veterans that may be outside the box. You know, talk to everyone. Address everybody in your community. Build a network. Save numbers. Get out there in the community. Beat the streets. Let everybody know who you are. One of the things I like to do a lot is I wear my mentor shirt out in the community, because when I'm out in the community, I'm still a direct reflection of our court. So, build these relationships out there, build lasting relationships with resources, community, and local government. Always have a go-to person that you can go to get stuff done, like with VSOs, veteran service officers, the ones that actually put your claims in and do stuff like that. It's very, very important to have these types of people that are on your team and only a phone call away. In Philly, we also have a tremendous relationship with the Office of Veterans Affairs, which is run by a tremendous young veteran named Carlo Aragoncillo. So, again, you want local government on your side as well. Next slide, please. Leader of the mentoring component. The mentor coordinator. What is the mentor coordinator? The mentor coordinator establishes a hierarchy of communication. Again, when we talk about that chain of command, this is what it brings to the table. Because the mentors, they're all volunteers. They're going to be looking at you just like they did in the military. What's our move? What do we do now? So you take your orders through a chain of command. Role models, the veteran-centered approach, and encourages others to do the same. Basically what this says to me is you're building each other up. You take that veteran-centered approach, you bring your mentees back to being, and your mentors back to being their time in service, back to being a soldier, sailor, Marine, whatever it may be, building each other up. You oversee all aspects of mentor engagement, co-develop the mentor handbook. This is something, this is policy and procedures for your whole court, really. So this will come down from the judge and also the actual court coordinator. But you definitely take part in developing that mentor handbook for your mentors. And again, some of the information comes down from even above you. Constantly strive towards improving and enhancing the component. Again, full-time job. You're constantly direct reflection of your court. Take it seriously when you're in the community. Continue to build relationships everywhere that you go. Next slide, the hierarchy of communication, please. Okay, so you see up top there the Veterans Treatment Court coordinator. I know in Philadelphia we have a court coordinator who is absolutely phenomenal. It's important to have great leadership from the top, and with the program coordinator, they distribute information to the mentor coordinator, and the mentor coordinator dishes it out to the mentor. So again, chain of command, and make sure you have, when you're looking at this diagram, make sure one of those mentors is, let's say you're not around, you're out a certain week. You got to have a mentor that's able to step in as a mentor coordinator too, that knows everything. So make sure you bring at least one of your mentors up to speed so they can step in to, be that mentor coordinator if you're not around. So, again, being a mentor, being a mentor coordinator, even being someone who received, life-changing services from a veterans treatment court, I can tell you that the mentor component is the key component to the success of these treatment courts. And again, a lot of this stuff was mentioned already by Mark, but this is real life situations here. It's unbelievable what these courts have done all across the country, and it all started in 2008 in Buffalo, New York, with one smart judge and a couple of veterans. So. That's all I got. I think the next slide goes to Scott, and I would kindly like to pass it off to Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Brilliant, as always, and thank you very much, Mark. Also perfect. As you can tell, audience that's listening right now, we are giving you a ton of information, and we realize that. But we do trainings, and we do break all this information down, and a lot of this is also available on our website. But, we are a dedicated staff, and you can hear it in all of our voices, hopefully, how much we care, and we know that you care, or else you would not be on this webinar today. I'm going to kind of jump now. I was going to cover more material, but I do not want to do overload, and I'm very conscientious of diminishing returns. So I do just want to give this last slide around policies procedure handbook, which we talked about. Tim was talking about it, Mark was talking about it, but it is critical that your mentoring component and mentoring components across the country have documented exactly what policies and procedures should look like. That is what we call sustainment. That's what's going to get us forward. And if you look at this slide, the last bullet I have is on maintaining, recruiting, and innovating. And as Tim so perfectly hit upon, maintaining, recruiting, and innovating are key. We have to be thinking of the future. The mentoring component is the sustainability piece of all VTCs, and I really believe that genuinely in my heart, that mentoring components, those folks, you folks, will always ensure that our brothers and sisters are taken care of that are involved in the criminal justice system. And for that, we are very grateful. So I am going to jump through some slides really quickly here. That's what we cover in our policy and procedures. We talk about recruiting, what a critical element that is. And lastly, we talk about what a critical element of innovating or always being on the cutting edge, looking towards the future. A couple of trends we are seeing is that peer support specialists and mentors, peer support specialists in particular, are getting more involved in veterans treatment court programs. As our service student organizations, we're seeing more involvement in. We're seeing telehealth services and teleservices in general becoming much more involved in VTCs. So the mentoring component remains, it will continue to be a very critical component on the VTC team. And again, I'd just like to end our portion here so that we can open up to some Q&A, that the three of us that are on this telephone call, as well as Justice for Vets, and of course NADCP as a whole, are very especially grateful to all the folks that are volunteering their time in the mentoring component of these VTCs. That's all I have, and again, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to turn it over now to the moderator.
Thanks very much, Scott, Mark, and Tim. As you said, Scott, there was a lot of information that was given to our participants in this webinar. Really, really valuable information. Nevertheless, we have, this is not a shy group, we have a number of questions in the chat box, and I'd like to encourage people to, if there are further questions, please type them in the chat box now, and we'll continue to try to address as many of them as we can. There were a number of questions about the role of, as thoroughly as it was covered, there were still questions about the role of the mentor in the court. So rather than address a lot of them, the first question I'd like to ask whoever can best respond, the mentor handbook that in contracts that were mentioned by the presenters, are they available on your Justice for Vets website, some templates that could be used as model?
This is Scott, and yes, they are available. If there's any difficulty at all in finding them, please just shoot myself out an email or Mark Camera, and we'll make sure that we definitely put you in the right direction, connect you to the right link. Okay,
terrific. So again, encourage the participants to go to that website. I've been on it. It's fabulous. There's more resources than you might ever want to look at, but they're very valuable, and that can address most of the questions that we have around the roles of the mentors. One critical thing, though, that came up a couple times is funding. So a couple sites wanted to know about how to fund the coordinator position. And then secondly, funding for the mentor program in general. So I wondered if, I don't know who could best respond to that one.
I think I'll take this one. So Typically, we do not see across the country the mentor coordinator position funded. We have seen a couple of states, and Mark, please feel free to jump in because you know more about this than I do, but we've seen a couple of states in which the mentor coordinator position is actually receiving compensation for. But overall, it's a volunteer position, the mentor coordinator position.
But as Scott said, it's not unheard of. I just spoke to somebody not too long ago who started out with a volunteer mentor coordinator, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't working for their court, and they applied for funding and were awarded funding for a position to do. To fund somebody for a mentor coordinator. Now, that makes it a complication because then that person is an employee of the court and has some responsibility to report to the court and maybe compromise the role that the coordinator has in maintaining confidentiality. It's not that it can't be done, it's complicated.
Sure. And so and then there's like some incidental supplies and things that communities might want to add to the program, whether it's shirts or time for maybe just to celebrate the mentors and the work that they do on an annual basis. So just fundraising. I know specifically that there's a number of courts that have reached out to foundations. And then some just do their own fundraising if they're a 501(c) for some of the incidental expenses that you might run into in running a mentor program. You find that to be true, Scott or Mark or Tim?
I think you'd be amazed at some of the courts that have massive budgets through their 501(c)(3)s. I know there are courts that spend thousands of dollars a month just on bus transportation and other types of transportation. There are courts that have funds to provide like first month rent for somebody who is in danger of being on the street. So a 501(c)(3) is a critical thing to have, whether it's funded through the mentor program. Of course, it can't be funded through, the judge, but through the mentor program or
Sure.
a community liaison group like Catholic Charities or whoever. But it's a critical thing because the community is going to want to fund something that is as effective as this for a population like this.
Okay, and I'm sure Tim or Mark or Scott, if some of the participants wanted to find out more specific information about that, they could reach out to you.
Absolutely, Dan.
Sure. So this issue, there's a couple of questions about this, and I know it's on everybody's mind, so we'll ask it is, in this era of social distancing, how has it impacted mentor programs? Are they making adjustments and adaptation? And then the part two to that question would be, I know NADCP does a lot of boot camps, bringing people in for trainings. Is NADCP done some adaptation to provide their technical assistance more virtually as opposed to in person? So the first question around the how mentor programs are adapting. Tim, why don't you start?
Tim would be great. Yep.
Yeah, so we're adapting now. I mean, it's I'll be honest with you. Right now, with the current situation, it's very, very tough to be a mentor. Everything is kind of over the phone, talking. I get the feeling that you don't necessarily get a good sense of what's going on in someone's life unless you're right in front of them. I like to get personal with people, so it's challenging right now. But we have all our mentors keep in contact with all our mentees. Unfortunately, courts are shut down until further notice. So right now we got to, just like in the military, adapt and overcome and try different ways. We have some mentees who are off the grid right now who, I fear have maybe fallen off the wagon. I mean, this whole situation right now has brought a huge change to the mentoring component. So very, very challenging times right now.
Thank you, Tim.
And Dan, this is Scott. Is regarding NADCP's approach, literally just like Tim said, we're in the process of adapting right now. We are working on some virtual courses that we're trying to push out ahead of schedule, and that in particular pertains to the mentor coordinator curriculum. So we are really striving to get that out a little earlier than was projected. And the other piece is we're very hopeful that as soon as this does lift, we'll be able to get back into the field to do those trainings. But in the interim, and I know Mark would jump in on this one, in the interim, we really want folks to take a look at the current 18 courses. They're like 7 to 13 minutes long that are available online right now in our partnership with PsychArmor. Again, they're available on the resources tab, which I believe may be the next slide, at Justice for Vets, that folks can actually go online and take a look at those 18 courses that are being offered.
You know, if I can add a pitch to what Scott's saying about the online courses, they've gotten used tremendously in the last year that we've had them open to the public, and a lot of places are using them as like mini boot camps as a refresher for their own mentor groups. One of the things that's really been a great thing for me to see is as we've done regional trainings, regional boot camp trainings, that groups have gotten together that like neighboring counties that had never spoken, you know, which in VTCs, they do that all the time. Most states have a statewide organization and judges all talk to one another, but for whatever reason, mentors never did. And now mentors are getting together and they're having conversations, one county to the next. How do you handle this? How do you handle this? And one place before all this, the public safety issue came to the peak, this group asked for our input about wanting to take the information they had gotten from us in a formal boot camp last year and individualize it to their region and do their own mini boot camp, and wanted permission to use the online courses as a starting point for a lot of their conversations. And we strongly encourage that, and we greatly appreciate the use of our materials to get information out there. And I just think, again, to raise the level of professionalism and to have people communicating effectively one program to the next is a great goal for everybody to have.
So they can be these online courses can really be used to empower communities, kind of take more ownership of a lot of their activities and growth. I think that's a great idea.
And a lot of programs are using them as orientation. So if somebody comes in and says they want to be a mentor, they have them look at the role, the course on the role of the mentor. And I've heard some who say somebody watched it and said, "Oh no, I'm not doing that." But it's more information for people to have.
Okay. And one quick question, because we're really winding down, so a brief answer if you can. So we haven't heard an awful lot about the role of the VA and the Veteran Justice Outreach Coordinators in the courts, and there's been a couple questions about partnering with the VA. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Tim, why don't you start out?
Yeah, so I mean, partnership with the VA is tremendous inside Veterans Treatment Courts. I mean, one of those things when I talked about that comfort zone, when I walked in a court for the first day, it was unbelievable to have the VA right there where the VA can go on a computer and find out who your primary care doctor is, or maybe even set up an appointment or make a direct call, stuff like that inside the courtroom. So the relationship with the people. If people are having a problem accessing the VA, who would you suggest they contact? Well, within your Veterans Treatment Court, you should always know who your Veterans Justice Outreach individual is. Find out who that person is in your area. Go on the VA website and find out who that is.
Okay, terrific. So, Scott or Mark, anything quickly about that?
Oh, no, that's perfect. Again, every VTC has a VJO on the team as a team member, and that would be the person I would connect with.
Okay, thank you. So we this concludes our question and answer session and the webinar, regrettably. We have some Justice for Vets resources, and you can download them. There should be a download icon on your screen, so you can download the mentor resource information and other documents there. So if you hit download, you'll be able to have those resources available. You can also download the certificate of attendance that we referenced earlier at the beginning for your own personal portfolio. Our next webinar, sponsored by the SAMHSA Gaines Center, will be April 30th from 2:30 to 4 p.m., Fostering Partnerships and Collaboration Across the SIM. Please check out our newsletters for updated information about that, and also information about accessing resources from this webinar. And to become part of the listserv, this is the information here that to sign up for our listserv and get our newsletters for more information on this topic and many other justice-related topics. Some additional resources here for Justice for Vets. And that completes our webinar for today. We had well over 500 participants on this. Thank you all for your time and attention. Thank you for your presentations on the part of our presenters, and looking forward to you on our next meeting with you on our next webinar. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.